Hi, welcome to Teach Lab with Mr. Simons, and in this video I'm going to talk about my absolute, no question, least liked task in all of teaching for me, which is giving back marks. That no one is ever satisfied, students, teachers, parents, whoever, in terms of the process. And it's a real challenge because assessment tasks, exams, reports, whatever you're going to do, are just so valuable to give students ideas on where their strengths are and where they need to improve, but that's not always what the focus is on. So I find this part very challenging in terms of teaching. So if we think overall about marks and grades, yes, they do have a role in education, and there are a couple of things that they do. So they raise the stakes for students. So if you know that a task is being marked versus one that is not being marked or accessible, there is a different level of attention that is paid. So that if students know that something counts, they are likely to put in more effort and maybe study and try harder to understand the concept. The other thing they do is they do give a snapshot of performance. So at a particular time, this is what the student was capable of, these were the challenges they experienced, this was the feedback they received. And that's very useful to share with other teachers and parents, and of course the students themselves. And that as an overall thing, marks and grades, that it's a place where feedback can start, sort of useful, rich discussions about here are the things that I'm seeing, here are the responses you put down, here are the suggestions for you to improve. If I think about what actually happens in the classroom when we give back assignments, exams, whatever it might be, students are focused solely on the mark they got and the marks that other people got and this whole comparison process, and not really on the feedback. And that's tough because you kind of give out the paper and you can say all the preamble you want about being mature, don't yell out across the room, but inevitably something will happen and kick off and people will compare and it will be frustrating. So that there is an overwhelming focus on what mark did you get, what mark did someone else get, did I do better or worse than them? The other thing that typically happens in giving back work is that there's never enough time to go through it effectively. There is such value in going through the entire paper and looking at this is how you could approach it here, these were the common mistakes here, but at the same time, students want to talk about their individual issues too. And it's very hard to find sufficient time to do both things, to go through the paper in detail, the task, and also to deal with individual student queries. The other thing is that if you think about the way that the classroom works, giving back work on the spot, that you get students who are inevitably disappointed with how they did and are a bit upset potentially about their mark in the context of how they thought they would go, or maybe in a bigger picture thing in terms of I didn't do well on this task, so therefore I'm not going to do well on my final exams and not get into the course in uni, and all those sorts of thoughts that can pile up. And at the same time, you've got another group of students that are yelling out marks across the room, that are comparing things, that are maybe criticizing each other. And this is not a great emotional space in terms of taking feedback on board in a kind of mature way. So I have thought about a number of different ways to try and give back work to make it a more meaningful and less intense experience. What I have tried to do, which is really only possible with smaller classes, is to ask students to make a time with me where I go through their paper individually with them. This is extraordinarily time consuming, and I think if you have a class over 10 people, it's going to be something that will take up most of your week. It's valuable though because you sit down, you explain where you're coming from, you explain how they did, you go through individual issues they might have, you say go away, take a look at it, we can have another chat about it, and then aside from those things, once you've done all the appointments, you can go through the paper as a class. Yes, very time consuming. Something that I have tried more recently, which I quite like, which was necessary during the period of remote learning when we couldn't physically give back tasks to students and had to give it back electronically, is that as we got back into the classroom, what I did was I marked the tasks, scanned them, and then emailed to students individually their tasks. And what I would do is email them sort of on the morning or the day before. We would go through it in class, and then they would come to class and they would know their marks. They would have been able to read my feedback, and they can come in and maybe be a bit more focused on going through the paper. I was pretty pleased with how this process went compared to giving back papers on the spot. Yes, it is more work as a teacher to mark everything, scan thing, and then send, maybe 20 something separate emails. But when the students come to class, they've already had a chance to get rid of some of that competitive energy or that initial disappointment, and to come in a different state, to be able to talk about it and perhaps receive feedback in a more meaningful way. When I email students the responses, is that doesn't take away the desire for some students to want to talk to you and say, I deserve this mark, I deserve this mark, I deserve this mark. And I have a whole process for reviewing marks, and I'll put a link to that in the description once it's done. It's not done right now as I'm recording this video, but it will be there when it's done. And that's a whole process that I use to take away that negotiation process for marks in the classroom. So watch out for that. Anyway, I'm really interested in terms of what other teachers are doing to try and give back assessments in a less stressful way, and less stressful for students and for teachers. Very interested to share ideas, so please put them in the comments. Thank you very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.